welcome back. So, Tony Blair was saying it is common sense to move toward digital IDs, and of course, he wanted identification documents in the form of a card like they have on the continent in the UK a few years ago now, which thankfully was fataled by the coalition government, simply because we are more of a high trust society and don't see the need to have yet another bit of identification document in order to prove who we are. And moreover, why do we need to prove who we are? It's one of those things of innocent until proven guilty, basically. To say, yes, this is me, good. But now you're saying, oh no, I don't believe you until you now prove it some more with some other proof of identity. And of course there is a point to be made in saying, well, it's good to be able to prove who you are when it comes to things like voting. Voter IDs are definitely worthwhile, or if it comes to age restriction items, but then that's a whole other libertarian freedom-loving argument if there should be age restrictions in the first place. But essentially when it comes to voting, then yes, there's a point to be able to prove who you are. And chances are you'll be able to prove who you are because of a driver's license or a passport. But let's say for whatever reason you're having difficulty, is it really worth then forcing everybody else to have to buy into yet another government scheme in order to surveil exactly what they're up to all the time? And also, and this might be more of a cheeky argument when it comes to proof of ID for voting, if you're worried that the cost is a bit prohibitive in terms of a driving license, even if it's a learner's driving license, or a passport, then it comes back to the argument of, should people be voting if they don't have property? As in, if somebody is voting and they don't own anything, they're not a contributing member, then chances are what they're voting for is just to be given more stuff from other people, in which case they're just accepting bribes. And should that be acceptable? Because in centuries gone by, the only people who would vote are the people who are choosing what they want their money to be spent on. Whereas now, it just comes down to anybody, which includes a lot of people who are now choosing how much money they want to receive from other people and other benefits which cost money as well. But I think we're getting sidetracked. The main point here is that the coronavirus pandemic, or the plandemic, if you will, is being used to further agendas which have already been there before and yet couldn't be successful through any other means. It's just, don't let a good crisis go unused. So the main one is actually to do with climate change and saying, well, hey, we need everybody to stop what they're doing and to be more self-contained, and we need to be aware of exactly how much carbon people are using and if they're eating meat because that's bad and the like, to combat climate change. And now from the coronavirus pandemic, what we're seeing is, well, you can't travel abroad, so you can't use air travel. Traveling to work is useless because you can't go to work anyway. And it seems the meat factories have the biggest outbreaks of COVID, which you could only tell if that is where testing was being done more thoroughly in order to find the positive that they want. So it seems to be the same goal, but just using different means. And then, when it comes to who's behind the vaccinations and if they're relevant or not, there's then a concern that if people don't consent to the COVID vaccine, then it's going to be the same stuff that's then put into the next flu vaccine, and as soon as they become mandatory, you're then waiving your rights when it comes to healthcare, as you could say you've already done because of the NHS. But nonetheless, that is definitely the case then to say, well, hey, I'm going to be injected with something that I don't know, and I don't have a choice in order to investigate it and decide whether or not I wish to go ahead with it, because I'm just being forced to do it. And bear in mind, if you've got people who are anti-vaxxers for everything, and therefore they don't wish for their children to have the MMR vaccine, then of course the children do suffer, because these are serious diseases, illnesses, viruses that do have very severe negative effects for the child and could indeed be fatal or have long-lasting side effects or just effects from being infected by measles, mumps or rubella in the first place. So it's then weighing up, well, hey, I'm concerned there's mercury in there, but I'm not so concerned about the virus, in which case you might go, well, maybe you should look into it more because there isn't mercury in them, and the virus is, especially things like polio, a huge problem. In which case, okay, fair enough, it seems worthwhile. But then when you go for other things, even polio vaccines actually, when it comes to the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, then they're causing more harm than good. And there is always a concern when it comes to somebody who is a bit too accurate in predicting what is going to happen, that it seems almost as if it was planned by them because they're so accurate, instead of them just having an accurate prediction, especially when their reasoning for it is very loose. And it's just, oh, this is something that was going to happen because it makes sense. It's like, yeah, but how do you know this? Like, please show me your reasoning in order to get to this point. Otherwise, I'm going to think that you played a hand in it, given that you were very, very well, in fact, perfectly set up for this situation. So, moving on, he's saying that former Prime Minister Tony Blair has said it is common sense to move in the direction of digital IDs as part of efforts to fight coronavirus. So this comes to immunity passports, essentially, that they want the government to know all the vaccinations you've had, and therefore whether or not they can allow you to do certain things based on your vaccination levels. So you don't necessarily just have to be concerned about what's in the vaccine, but then also the limitations you'll have if you don't wish to oblige to it. And, as you'd expect, Silky Carlo, director of Big Brother Watch, said the idea of digital ID and vaccination checks could easily lead to a health apartheid that few would expect of a democratic country. Precisely. More than just a health apartheid as well. Digital IDs would lead to sensitive records spanning medical, work, travel, and biometric data about each and every one of us being held at the fingertips of authorities and state bureaucrats. This dangerous plan would normalise identity checks, increase state control over law-abiding citizens, and create a honeypot for cyber criminals. It is basically suggesting that everybody is guilty instead of innocent. The counter-argument is, oh, well, there's no more than you would provide for a supermarket for a loyalty card. But yes, there is, because you don't provide them vaccination information or work or travel or biometric data. But the things that you do provide, you willingly do so by your choice. They're not forcing you to do it, which is the main delineation and distinction that has to be drawn. Moreover, sure, you might get hacks into private companies to say, oh, well, cool, now we know where this person lives and their shopping habits. But you're only going to go after a particular proportion of the population. Whereas if you've got something that is more extensive, that is held by the government, then if there are any data leaks or security breaches in that, then suddenly everybody is affected on a very severe level as well. So, again, it's a concern, not just for a government who is misbehaving, but also for anybody else who wishes to take advantage of this database of information. So Digital Infrastructure Minister Matt Warman said, digital technology is helping us through the pandemic and continues to improve the way we live, work and access vital services. Mainly the internet. And would you like to guess why that's so successful? Because of the lack of government involvement. That's completely correct. Well done. Otherwise it wouldn't have been able to grow as fast and as well as it has done. With a load of failures along the way. Let's not forget. But they've died off and are forgotten about. People thought, the classic goes, MySpace was all the rage until Facebook came along. But if MySpace was a government entity that was mandated, we never would have got Facebook. Which, in a way, would have been good, but you get the idea. And then he goes on to say, we want to make it easier for people to prove their identity securely online so transactions can become even quicker. It has the potential to add billions to our economy. Getting rid of cash. That's the underlying message there. that yes, we would rather people don't use cash because that's more difficult to trace and people have too much freedom then, whereas we would rather be able to see everything that they're doing all the time in order to keep tabs on them and in order to decide if there's somebody who is maybe a political dissident and we are concerned that they might undermine our authority. And when it comes to these things, people say, oh, well, but it's the law. It's like, but laws can be wrong, as in morally wrong and unjustified, and therefore the law needs to be changed. The law of the land doesn't mean it's a law of nature. Yeah, it's the same word, but they're very, very different. And the law of the land can definitely be wrong, as we've seen before with slavery, for example, which we've all agreed is terrible. But it was the law at the time. But now, of course, the law has been changed to reflect the understanding that we're a bit more morally advanced, if you will, than our predecessors were. But if you're saying that, oh, the law is the law, then why are you also judging previous people by today's standards? That doesn't make any sense. But moving on. Actually, something that he says that kind of makes sense. Blair also argued that coronavirus quarantine policies were killing international travel. Yes, they are. Correct. He said he didn't think the 14-day quarantine period for those returning from certain countries abroad was necessary. Well, then the government agrees with you because certain countries, that's true. The question is not how you eliminate the risk, it is how you contain it, he added, or minimise it, and if there isn't much of a risk in the first place, it's already minimised. Mr. Blair also said that it was a mystery to him why there hadn't been a more coordinated international effort to tackle the virus. I honestly don't understand the reason for that not happening, he said. That's because we couldn't get accurate information from the World Health Organization or from China, which is where it came from, because China wasn't willing to share information and the World Health Organization was going to go along with whatever China said. That's why. And therefore we had to decide for ourselves because we couldn't rely on the World Health Organization to do its job because it's being paid off by China. Glad I could help there, Blair. Glad I could help. Speaking of poor countries in Africa, he said, they can't do lockdown, it's just not possible, but as a result of the global crisis, they're facing real food security problems, real supply problems. Yes, and that level of real supply problems is also coming over here as well, where we're seeing shortages, and thankfully it's not as bad as it has been, but because people expect deliveries so much and so quickly, the stockpiles that used to be common aren't anymore because they're reliant on the supply chain. So when there's damage there, then the new items cannot be manufactured or produced or distributed because they're not getting the raw ingredients needed in order to manufacture them. And yes, you've also pointed out, well done Mr. Blair, that more people are going to die of starvation from the lockdown measures than would have ever died from the Wu flu itself. So yes, good job. I think, Mr. Blair, you're making points which have insinuations that you're not aware of. Because what you seem to be suggesting is that individuals should be able to decide for themselves. And the main problem we've had is because of a communist dictatorship. And I don't think that's what you mean to be saying. But he also said, on vaccines, he said he hoped we do not end up in a situation where wealthy countries get the vaccines and poor countries are scrabbling for them. This wouldn't just be morally wrong, it would be totally against our own interests. The second part, if you believe vaccines are good, then no, not necessarily. You've got to take care of yourself before you can take care of anybody else. Look after number one, as the old saying goes. But let's look at how the vaccine effectiveness has been in the poor countries, again, when it comes to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and actually maybe it's more of a curse than a gift. So I doubt they're really going to be scrabbling for a vaccine for a virus that isn't really much of a concern, especially out there where the life expectancy is much lower anyway, and therefore they don't live to the age where something like COVID would be a concern. Unless it affects black people more than other people, in which case I wonder how that happened. China? But as always, let me know what you guys think down below. Always intrigued to hear what you guys have to say about these things. And as always, until next time, have a good one.